Dear participants, I hope you found session 1 informative. Now, welcome to session 2 of module 8, where we will dive into quality improvement methodologies and tools. Let us build on that foundation of session 1 and explore various quality improvement tools. As far as different QI methodologies are concerned, let us start with the Plan, Do, Study, Act or PDCA cycle, which is a powerful framework for continuous improvement in healthcare. Why is PDCA considered as a powerful framework for continuous quality improvement in healthcare? Here, we can talk about the following facts. First, this is a structured approach for implementing and testing changes. But again, it helps to minimize risks by testing on a small scale before a wider implementation. And thirdly, it provides a room for continuous learning and adaptation. As you can see in our slide, this PDCA cycle is broken down into 4 major aspects or major areas. The first one on our right hand side, is called the plan. Here, the main question that you need to ask yourself: what are the issues that you need to do at the planning stage? There are several issues. The first thing is you need to set improvement goals. And to do so, you need to identify a specific problem or area of improvement. And then you need to predict what will happen. To do so, you need to set SMART goals for your project. But again, you need to develop a plan to address the identified problem by outlining the change you want to test. But again, you need to decide how will you measure the success or the change. That's what we call decide on what data do you want to collect. The second aspect is do. Okay? Here, the main question that we need to ask ourselves is, what are the key issues that you need to do at the doing stage? You can see you need to carry out a plan, you need to document any problems encountered, but also you need to collect the data. Here, you need to implement the planned change on a small scale, that you need to do a pilot project. But here, the most important issue is to ensure that everyone must be involved to understand their roles and their responsibility in the implementation of the planned planned change that you want to accomplish. The third aspect is study. Under this aspect, you need to collect and analyze data to see if the change is making any positive impact. But again, you need to evaluate if change is achieving the desired outcome. And the most important thing, you need to identify any unintended consequences. That's why you can see in our slide that you need to do a full analysis. You need to compare data prediction. You need to examine learning. Why you need to examine learning? So that you can be able to identify any unintended consequences. And the last part is act. That based on the finding, okay, you need either to adopt or adapt or abandon the cycle. What does it mean? You need to standardize change if it is successful or beneficial. If the implementation of the intervention is successful, then you need to standardize change. Or you need to modify the plan and retest if needed. But on the other side, you need, if possible, you need to abandon the change if it's not effective. So, it is fair to say that the PDCA cycle provides a structured and systematic framework for testing and refining changes to improve processes or services. Another QI methodology that I need to talk to you today is the model for improvement and implementation. The model for improvement is a framework designed to guide and accelerate efforts to improve processes, products, or systems. And of course, it's particularly useful in the situation where there is a desire to test the changes before fully implementing them. As you can see in our slide, the model is divided into three specific components. That is aim, measurements, and change. And for each component, there are fundamental questions. And these questions set the stage for improvement by getting you to clearly define your goals and approach. And they can be addressed in any order as you wish. But let us start with aim, where the first question is, what are we trying to accomplish? In other words, the question centers to establish what is our aim. One thing to remember is that your aim should be very specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. In other words, it should be smart to inform your improvement efforts. The second question, or the second area, is measurement. And here the question is, how will we know that change is an improvement? To do so, you need to identify metrics to track your progress toward the aim. But again, the third area is change. And here, the question is, what changes can we make that will result into improvement? Here, you need to brainstorm and outline potential changes to implement. So, the PDCA cycle, okay, this is allow you to test the changes on a small scale and learn from the results and refine your approach before a broader implementation. From the previous slide, we talked about the mode for improvement. Now let's talk about mode for improvement and implementation as the strategy that often revolve around the key question that can help us to guide the process and ensure that the improvements are effective and sustainable. In this model, there are several questions that we need to ask ourselves when we are trying to implement an intervention that are geared to improvement. The first question is, what are we trying to accomplish? Here, the specific goals or the specific objective is to ask ourselves what specific outcomes or improvement are we aiming for? But again, we need to ask ourselves who will benefit from this improvement? Also, by when do we want to achieve this? This takes us to the second question, which asks, how will we know that the change is an improvement? Of course, this is a measure, and the specific question here, what is specific measurements, will indicate a success or failure. In order to get this measurement to determine whether there is a success or a failure, we need to collect the data. And here the question will be, how are we going to collect the data and analyze data to track the progress? Also, we can ask ourselves, do we have the benchline or do we have the baseline metrics? And what constitutes a meaningful improvement? The second question is, what changes can we make that will result into improvement? Of course, we need to ask ourselves what interventions or modification might lead to better outcomes. Are these changes practical or feasible to implement? What evidence or best practices that support the expected benefit of this change? So these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. But in the process of implementing any intervention under this module for improvement and implementation, there are issues that we need to take into account. For example, the issue of stakeholders engagement. We need to know who are our stakeholders, who needs to be involved or informed about the change. What strategies will we use to involve the stakeholders and gain their support? But how are we going to address the potential resistance, for example, or concerns from the stakeholders? What skills or knowledge do staff members need to implement these changes? And what are the methods that can we use to provide trainings? Do you think should we take them to workshops? Should we develop the online courses? Or what mode of training will be useful and more appropriate for our stakeholders? But we need also to ask ourselves, how will we provide continuous support to address the issues and maintain momentum? But what financial, for example, what resources do we require? What financial resources do we want? What about the human resource? What about the material resources are needed for successful implementation? But not only that, how will resources be allocated? How will we ensure that resources are used efficiently and effectively? And as far as change is concerned, what is the change management plan? What structured approach will you use to manage the change process? How are we going to handle resistance, for example? What strategies are we going to use to manage and mitigate resistance to change? And the most important thing is monitoring and the feedback. How will we monitor the progress? What methods will we use to continuously track the implementation and its effectiveness? What feedback mechanisms are in place? How will we collect and use the feedback from stakeholders and the users, for example? How will we address issues? What processes are in place for identifying and resolving potential problems that arise during the implementation? But the most important question that we need to ask ourselves is about the sustainability issues. How will we ensure sustainability? What strategies will you use to maintain improvement over a long period of time? How will the changes be integrated, for example, into existing policies and practices to ensure that they become part and parcel of our routine operations? What will be the role of leadership, for example? How will the leadership support and reinforce the changes to ensure continued success? Dear participants, I'm quite sure that by addressing all these questions, any healthcare organization or any project or any intervention can develop a clear and actionable plan for both improvement and implementation, which will ensure that the efforts lead to meaningful and lasting change. Let's go to common QI, common tools in QI initiative. The first one will start with what we called cause and effect diagram, or it's called the fishbone diagram, and sometimes it's known as Ishikawa diagram, which is a powerful tool. Okay, it's a powerful visual tool used to identify and analyze root causes of a problem. And of course, it helps teams to understand all possible factors that might contribute to a specific issue or a problem. There are various benefits or purposes of using this tool. The main purpose of the diagram, this diagram, is to systematically break down the potential cause of a problem. And by doing so, it helps team to find the root causes rather than addressing the symptoms. As you can see, the structure of the diagram look like a fishbone skeleton, where the problem statement or the effect is the head, and the major category of the potential causes form the bones. So we can fairly say that this diagram has four main components. The head that represents the problem or effect, the spine, which is a central line extending from the head, and then we have the main bones, which represent the branches extending from the spine, representing the major categories of the cause. And then we have subbones. These are the small branches extending from the main bones, detailing more specific causes. Now, it's important to understand the steps to be followed to create the fishbone diagram. The first step, you need to define the problem. It's important to start by clearly defining the problem you want to analyze. And then place this problem statement at the head of the diagram. I can give you an example. If, for example, the problem is high customer complaints in a health facility, write it at the head. Then, identify the major categories. What are you supposed to do is to determine the broad categories that might contribute to the problem. And for our case, using the same example, the common categories might include people, might include processes, for example, might include machines, might include methods, might include environments, might include management. For example, the patient satisfaction categories might include equipment, methods, material, and people. This can be the main category that might contribute to the problem. And then you need to brainstorm the causes. You need to brainstorm the potential causes for each category identified. And this is always advised that you engage the team members to generate ideas. For example, you may think that an example can be if you have the shortage of drugs, could be one of the potential causes might include that might lead to patient dissatisfaction. Then you need to develop the sub-causes, where you need to break down each major cause into more detailed sub-cause. These steps help to uncover the underlying causes or underlying issues. For example, for poor communication between departments, the sub-causes might include, for example, absence of integrated system or platform for real-time data sharing, of which this can lead to delays and incomplete information transfer. Then you need to analyze the diagram. What are you supposed to do? You need to review the completed diagram to identify which causes have the most significant impact. Look for the patterns and the connection. And lastly, you need to prioritize and act. What are you supposed to do? You are supposed to prioritize the causes based on their impact and the feasibility of addressing them. Then you need to develop an action plan to address these prioritized causes. Another tool in QI initiative that I would like to discuss with you is called Pareto chart. Okay, the Pareto chart is sometimes or is also known as the Pareto diagram or Pareto analysis. This is a graphical tool used in quality management and problem solving to identify and prioritize the most significant factors that can contribute to a problem. And it is based on the Pareto principle, which states that roughly 80% of effects come from 20% of the causes. And the key concept of Pareto, okay, that the Pareto principle, that the 8-20 rule. This principle suggests that the small number of causes, around 20%, are usually responsible for a large portion, around 80% of the problem or effect. Let me give you a simple example that 80% of the complaint or 80% of complaints, for example, in a healthcare facility, might come from 20% of these issues. So, the Pareto principle can help us to identify problems that are most impactful so that efforts can be focused on addressing those key issues. So, as you can see in on our slide, the Pareto chart is structured in bar charts, whereby the bars represent the frequency or impact of different causes, and the bars are typically arranged in descending order, with the tallest bar on the left representing the most significant cause. And each bar represents a different category or type of a problem. And then we have a cumulative line, okay? The line graph that shows the cumulative percentage of the total problems or effect as you move from the left to the right across the bars. And this cumulative percentage helps to visualize the proportion of the total effect represented by the causes up to that point. Now, if you want to create a Pareto, what are the key steps that you need to follow? What are the key steps? The first step is to identify and list issues. How are you going to identify the list issues? The first thing, you need to collect data on various issues or causes affecting the problem. For instance, you can collect data on different types of customer complaints or type of defects in the services or in the product that you have in your health facility. Then you need to sort data, okay? You need to count the frequency or impact of each issue. Then arrange the issue in descending order based on their frequency or impact. And then you need to calculate the cumulative percentage, whereby you need to calculate, to have the total calculation, whereby you are going to calculate the total number of occurrences or total impact. And then calculate the cumulative sum of occurrences or impact as you progress throughout the list. Once you have the cumulative sum, you need now to construct the chart. What are you supposed to do? Draw a bar chart for each issue with height representing the frequency or impact. And then plot a cumulative percentage on the secondary axes to show how each issue contributes to the problem. Then analyze the chart. What are you supposed to do? Identify the most significant issue that contribute to the majority of the problem. Typically, you will focus on the issue that fall within 80% range. As we conclude this session, I would like you to get more insights about QI tools by watching a very short video of not more than 16 minutes using the link provided on these slides.